Starbase is buzzing with activity, from building up the next launch tower at Starbase to completely redoing the heat shield on the next ship to fly and preparing the launch pad for that very next flight. It is for that reason that our own Jack and Sean went on a flight over Starbase to capture everything from above. This allows us to have a different perspective on all of the activity and to spot some intriguing hardware that will definitely spark some conversations. We've got all of that and more coming up in your Starbase update. Let's start off with Massies, which is our first location on our trip down Highway 4 to Starbase. This trip was in fact taken by Ship 26, which had been at the Massies Outpost for a few weeks and underwent a static fire test on the newly built static fire test stand. By the way, the aerial views from Jack and Sean of this stand show the flame trenches pretty much like new and that no major damage was incurred during this test, or if there was any damage, they repaired it rather quickly. As mentioned before, Ship 26 was removed from this stand, installed on its own transport stand, and has now been rolled out of Massies down Highway 4 all the way to the Rocket Garden. This vehicle's future is uncertain, but what's definitely certain is that we'll be keeping an eye on it, just in case. We're not sure if this may or may not have been the ship's last chance to shine, but you do have a last chance to let it shine on your wall as a print from our shop. If you go to shop.nasaspaceflight.com, you'll notice that some prints are marked as last chance, as we regularly refresh the catalogue to keep things, well, fresh. If you want to declare yourself a member of Kevin's Ship 26 fan club, although I'm not sure why you would want to do that, then you've got to do it soon because our only prints of this cursed ship are about to leave the shop. Continuing with the new developments at Massies, we could see this week how the new structural test stand continues to grow with a third level now installed. We could see some pieces for what may be a fourth level for this stand, so this is probably not its final form just yet. Once complete, this stand should be able to test tanks of various sizes and configurations, just like the one sitting next to the stand, which is B14.1. We mentioned last week that this very test tank had been fitted with a cap that had some sort of pusher structure to be able to push down on the chopstick lifting points, noting that this is likely to test the structural strength of boosters ahead of catches. While during Jack and Sean's flight the cap was still on top of B14.1, it was removed shortly after the same day, so we'll see what they do with it in the future. This could have been just some sort of fit check, and we may have to wait until some proper testing happens later down the line. Now, speaking of potential future testing, there was an interesting piece of hardware that caught our eye while reviewing the flyover footage. If you take a look at this piece of hardware over here at Massies, we can see it has a pentagon shape within a decagon, which would total 15 vertices for this shape. This piece of hardware wouldn't stand out if it weren't because of what these 15 vertices may mean. This is a long explanation, so you may want to sit down. You may remember from a couple months ago that the FAA and SpaceX have started an environmental impact statement at Launch Complex 39A in Florida. The main reason for this is because of the changes to the plans for that launch pad and also to the design of Starship. The documentation pointed out that the number of Raptors on Super Heavy boosters would be 35, while it would be 9 for the ships. This increase in the number of Raptors for the ship was expected, as it is something Elon has already mentioned in the past, but not for the booster. And well, let's say SpaceX has already a history of mentioning more engines for the booster on these sorts of documents than it eventually has had. Fast forward to today and this piece of hardware pops up at Massies. It's very easy to notice that the 20 outer engines of Super Heavy plus another 15 in the centre in the same arrangement, then that piece of hardware would make up for 35 in total. But of course this piece could be for anything, and this may just be a coincidence, except this looks kinda like what we saw when SpaceX was building the thrust simulator stand for the current version of boosters. These pictures from a flyover last year shows what was going to become the base of that thrust simulator stand. In case you don't know, this stand has pushers that push against the aft cap of the booster where the 13 inner engines are installed, and this allows SpaceX to simulate the thrust of these engines against the bottom of the booster during cryogenic proof testing. Despite the umbrellas covering part of it, we can see that there's a central hexagon inside of a larger circle. This hexagon has 3 plates inside arranged in a triangle and another 10 outside of those for a total of 13 plates. These locations are where eventually the 13 pushers would be installed, as we can see in the now finished stand, which is currently residing at the Rocket Garden awaiting for a new booster to be ready for testing. Now, this may just be a big coincidence, but this could be the start of a new thrust simulator stand for future boosters sporting 15 inner engines for a total of 35 overall. We don't really know if this is going to be the case, and if it is, when this might happen, as we really don't have any other pieces of information. Just for fun, if we take the numbers SpaceX gave us back in April for Starship V2 and V3, and also for the Raptor 3 engine, a quick bit of math says that 280 tons of thrust times 35 engines gives us 9,800 tons of thrust, very similar to what the total thrust goal for Starship V3 is. If we also take the advertised thrust of Raptor 2, which is 230 tons of thrust, and multiply that by 35, we get a total thrust of 8,050 tons, somewhat close to the total thrust goal for Starship version 2. So perhaps this is something we'll see on version 2 of the booster, or maybe it'll be something that's coming up in the future on version 3. Regardless, and as always, it's worth emphasizing once again that this is just a conjecture, and there's a good chance this is nothing relevant at all, but you know, we're pointing it out just in case. Okay, now let's hop over to Sanchez, where we can see a lot more differences since the last time we flew. Of course, we didn't need to fly to know that 7 of the 9 tower sections for the second launch tower at Starbase are already here. We've covered that on previous Starbase update episodes, but this perspective gives us a nice look at the work being done on them. You can see how SpaceX has already laid out next to them a lot of the cryogenic pipes that they'll be installing on these sections prior to rollout and stacking at the launch pad. In fact, some of these cryogenic pipes were still arriving at the time of the flyover. These sections will therefore be a lot more completed once they're stacked together, so that means a lot of things. From a shorter time for the tower to be ready after full stack, to employees not having to do a lot of work at the incredible heights that this tower will reach. It's definitely better for everyone if this hardware can be installed at or near ground level rather than 140 meters up in the air. SpaceX is also in the process of building a few more booster transport stands, which will come in handy once booster production ramps up even more. It's certainly going to be fun seeing them having to juggle a bunch of these between stands as they build, test and fly them. Moving down the road, we have the new multi-level car park. As we can see, the main structure appears mostly completed, although outfitting is still in progress, so perhaps this may still be a few weeks away from becoming active. Here at the production site, of course, is where vehicles are produced, it's in the name, but also where they are prepared for flight. That's exactly the case for Ship 30, the ship set to fly on Starship's next launch. If you remember from last week's Starbase update, Elon had done a late breaking news update on this vehicle. This update was that this ship would be stripped of all of its tiles, not just a few, but all of its tiles.
We're going to replace the whole heat shield on the ship.
And that better ones of a newer design would be installed instead. These tiles are said to have 2 times the strength, as Elon pointed out in his update. Additionally, the ship would also have installed an ablative material underneath the tiles in case the tiles fall off. Then the ablative material would protect the body of the vehicle and give it more chances of surviving through re-entry. With that update in place, all of our eyes went to the high bay, where Ship 30 has been ever since it underwent its static fire test campaign. Soon after Elon's update, the vehicle was moved from the turntable on the left side of the building to the front right corner of the high bay. This corner is specifically well known to be where SpaceX has been working on the heat shield of previous vehicles, and it is in fact where it is now performing the daunting task of completely replacing Ship 30's heat shield. The scaffolding that already existed in this corner has been revamped and extended for this massive operation, visibly reaching all the way to the tip of the nose cone. We can see each of the scaffolding levels has been numbered, with the topmost one being the 21st level. That's quite a lot of levels of scaffolding. Saying that this is going to be a major undertaking is probably an understatement. Each ship has approximately 18,000 heat shield tiles. Even if SpaceX workers took just 1 minute to remove each tile, it would take more than 12 days of non-stop work to completely remove them. After that, they would have to apply the ablative material, put the new tiles on, and then test that they're all in the right place and don't fall off. This work is now well underway, with large sections of tiles removed on the main body and flaps of the vehicle, as well as the tip of the nose cone. Of note is that there are two ways of installing the tiles on the vehicle depending on their location, which also means there are two ways of removing them depending on which way they were installed. The great majority of tiles are attached to the vehicle using pins that are welded to the hull of the ship, and then each tile clamps onto 3 of these pins. In order to remove tiles installed this way, workers have to drill through the tile and open up a hole where these pins are attached to and physically pull away from the tile to remove it. A smaller portion of the tiles is instead glued to the hull of the vehicle in places such as the forward or aft dome sections of the ship, or the rounded portions of it like the nose cone tip or the leading edge of the flaps. From what we've been able to see, in order to remove the glued tiles, workers just break up each tile in chunks and separate the chunks from the body. The vast majority of tiles, if not all of them, also include a white blanket material underneath them that also has to be removed, and for glued tiles, the glue needs to be cleaned up and the metal surface needs to be grinded for the new glue to be able to stick onto the surface. So there's not only a lot of tiles, but there's also other stuff that workers have to deal with and work on before they have to install the new ablative material and the new tiles. It's not going to be an easy task. From Jack and Sean's flyover, we can also see that it appears that the payload bay door on Ship 30 has been removed, or at least it is opened. This is an interesting thing to note, as we really didn't see the same kind of work on Ship 29, so perhaps Ship 30 will be using this door in its flight. Definitely something to consider once we get closer. This week we also saw more progress on the new booster on the block, Booster 15. This had begun stacking just the previous week, and as of recording it seems like its liquid oxygen tank is almost complete. The only piece missing to complete it would be the engine section of the booster, which sits all the way at the bottom of this tank. This week we were also able to take a peek into Mega Bay 1, and we were able to spot Booster 13 still on the central workstation. From this point of view, it appears that no major work has been done on it for now, so maybe SpaceX is taking it slow with this one. This booster is not the next in line, but should be the one for the flight after the next one, so essentially Flight 6, barring any booster skipping, of course. From our flyover pictures, we also had the chance to peek into Mega Bay 2, where work is still ongoing to outfit it. We can see a lift and a crane still doing work inside, and a bunch of material still sitting outside to the west of Mega Bay 2. This likely means that there is still a few more weeks of work here until we see some serious build-up of new ships inside of it. That build-up will be done thanks to the Starfactory, which is now fully joined to Mega Bay 2 as of this latest flyover. Although some outfitting work still remains on the outside of the building, as we can see here with this crane still installing AC units, it appears that the main structure is complete and that this will be its final footprint. At least for now. Work is still continuing on the land between the Starfactory and Mega Bay 1, and it looks like it might be to connect wiring and plumbing in between the buildings, so nothing major. In recent months, SpaceX has also been doing some work to the north of the Starfactory, with a new building being built and piping being laid down. This might be an auxiliary facility for the Starfactory, but we don't really know what it's all about at the moment. I'm sure we'll figure it out as SpaceX finishes it all. Coming back down to the ground, this week we saw a booster forward dome staged outside of the Starfactory. Unfortunately, there's no new designs here. This is still a version 1 booster forward dome. But if we go up again to our flyover footage, we can see what appears to be a scrapped forward dome for a version 2 ship. By now, we know that version 2 of the ship will feature the new flatter E-dome, or elliptical dome, which will allow SpaceX to increase the propellant capacity on that version of the ship. We can see this dome has rectangular cuts on it, which is usually a sign that SpaceX took samples of the dome for analysis. As for the dome, it means it'll go to the scrap pile and won't be used on any sort of vehicle. Next to where these two domes were spotted is the new office building that SpaceX is building at Starbase. This building continues to see progress every week, and it appears that the floors of practically all of the levels are now all filled in. The northern extension of this building is also being outfitted now with exterior panels and floors, and it appears no more expansions will be done on this side of the building. Groundwork seems to still be ongoing on the piece of the building that will eventually connect to the southeast side of the Starfactory. We can see from the aerial views how crews are still preparing the foundations for build-up here. On the Starfactory, the side that will be joined to the office building is being covered now as well, probably to protect the interior of the factory from all of the potential debris from the construction happening right next door. After going through Massies and the production site, it's now time for our last stop on our way down Highway 4, the launch site. Here, SpaceX employees have been working non-stop after Starship's 4th flight to prepare it for Booster 12's upcoming engine test campaign and then, of course, the 5th flight of Starship. Earlier in the week, we had seen teams removing the hold-down clamps on the OLM one by one, work that we're very well used to seeing after every flight of Starship. Luckily, the clamps were reinstalled later in the week, so by the time Jack and Sean flew, the clamps were back on the OLM and were covered in blue tarps, as we can see from above. As you can see, the dance floor is up on the OLM and a lot of scaffolding has been set up inside of the launch ring to work on all of the hold down arms and Raptor quick disconnects. A lot more scaffolding is also present on the top of the launch ring itself, as workers continue the lengthy task of refurbishing the OLM ahead of the next flight. This week we were able to finally see the OLM guiding pins being installed back on the launch ring. These help guide boosters down inside the OLM when these vehicles are being mounted on the launch ring via the chopsticks. This means that once all the refurbishment work is complete and scaffolding is removed from the inside of the mount, Booster 12 can be installed on the launch ring for engine testing. Some other work we always tend to see on the OLM after every flight is work on the booster quick disconnect, which always gets blasted by the Raptor engines on Super Heavy during liftoff. This time it seems like perhaps the damage was not as severe as during previous flights, as the flex hoses on the back of the quick disconnect have not been removed yet, something that was indeed done on previous flights as they got heavily damaged. If you remember, for Flight 4, SpaceX installed a new door for this quick disconnect, so perhaps it did its job and was able to properly protect this plumbing from Starship's liftoff power. While the OLM is being readied for engine testing and Starship's next flight, teams are already putting the final touches on the chopsticks for the long-awaited first booster catch. This week we saw multiple tests of the landing rail and work being done on the shock absorbers for this landing rail. This rail, as its name indicates, is what boosters will be landing on using their little lifting points at the top. Before a catch, the rail is raised and exposed for the landing. The shock absorbers on the rail then take up the load from the booster landing on the rail as it settles down on the chopstick arms. Hopefully we will see this in action live for the next flight of Starship. Elon confirmed this week once again that the plan for now appears to be to land a booster back on the launch tower for Starship's next flight. He now says this will happen in late July, which is not surprising given the amount of work left on Ship 30's heat shield. At least we now know from the FAA that SpaceX will not need a mishap investigation for Starship's 4th flight. According to the agency, in a statement to NSF, it says, quote, "All flight events for both Starship and Super Heavy appear to have occurred within the scope of planned and authorized activities." NSF also asked the FAA whether the landing of the booster back at the launch tower for the upcoming flight would need a license modification, and what it said was more or less what we already know. That is, the current license that SpaceX has for Starship allows multiple flights of the same vehicle configuration and mission profile as Flight 4, and that, of course, if SpaceX modifies the flight profile, then it would need a modification to this license. So it appears that while no mishap investigation will be needed, SpaceX will still need a modified launch license to be able to land boosters back at the launch site. At least that's a lot less paperwork than for previous flights, so here's hoping it's completed quickly. Part of the launch site preparations for future flights also involves the dismantling of the unused old hardware at the tank farm. Prior to Flight 4, SpaceX removed 3 of the big vertical tanks at the tank farm, and a bunch of leftover pipes and other structures still remained after the flight, which is now being removed and cleared up. At the same time, SpaceX continues to add more space for more horizontal tanks to be installed at the Orbital tank farm. As we mentioned last week, SpaceX had announced that this single tank farm will eventually supply both the first and second launch pad here at Starbase, so another tank farm expansion was definitely to be expected. We had already seen foundation work done to add more tanks, and now from the air we can see that work seems to have been completed. It appears that SpaceX could fit at least another 2 tanks here in the near future, so we'll keep an eye on when those arrive and are installed. Also near the tank farm is Starhopper, and while it hasn't seen much change ever since it got its fancy new weather tower, the building that was next to it is being dismantled. The wall right where this building is located is also being taken down. It wouldn't be all that surprising if SpaceX moves the main entrance to the launch site to this new location, as the previous one is about to be blocked by more tanks at the tank farm. Continuing with the mind-blowing pace of work here at the launch site, we have, of course, the build-up of the second Starship tower at Starbase. This week we finally had the 4 corners of the base of the tower all going up and being installed on the foundations for the tower. We were able to see these foundations from the air right before the corners were installed, which gives us an idea of the layout of the tower and where the OLM will go. As theorized, it appears that the launch mount will be going on the south side, with the launch tower drawworks and adjacent facilities being located to the west and north. We've already started seeing the drilling rig seemingly preparing the area to the south of the tower, which is where we expect that OLM to be located. This drilling work doesn't look a lot like the one we had seen for the first launch mount, so as we had expected from the work ongoing at LC-39A, it's very likely that the orbital launch mount will be of a different design than what we've seen before. Even the tower base is of a different design. Going back to those four corners that had been installed, you can see this is rather different from the design we see on the current tower. The current tower was first built up as a concrete base and then steel plates were added to it. The new tower will already have steel walls and corners, and then they will be filled in with concrete, so it should be a lot more resilient from the start. You may also notice from these shots that parts of the new Terex Daymag CC8800-1 crane have started to arrive. Sounds a bit like a telephone number. This monster crane is slowly being put together next to the new launch tower and should be the one in charge of stacking up all the tower sections one after another. Starship launched just over a week ago, and yet Starbase looks and feels like it's just any other day at the office. The company is at full power, going through a lot of work to prepare every location within Starbase for either the next Starship flight or many more flights down the line. I'm Caton for NSF, thanks for watching, and goodbye.